As the S&V specialist for my organization, there are two distinct things I might need to do. The first of which is to help solve a more complicated problem. So I can import some recordings into my project. These recordings might have been made by my test engineer or my operator. I can take these recordings and drag them into the time editor so I can look at the time data. I can select any one of the channels and hit the play button to listen to it. I can bring up a spectrogram to get an overview of the frequency content, just so I can help ensure that the data is good. If I'm satisfied with these results, I can now say I'd like to go through and do some further analysis, and I can take and drag these recordings over here into my time editor or my time data processing. In here, I can decide what type of analysis I need to do. Maybe I need to do some 2D analysis. Maybe I need to do some analysis versus an RPM for my run-up. So I can simply grab an FFT versus RPM, my order extraction. Now it's just a matter of connecting the dots. And then I can connect my results matrix. And this will allow me to review my data. So I can go through and in any one of these elements that I've defined, change any of the analysis properties, look at a different frequency range, change the type of averaging that we're doing. So after we go through and do the analysis, down here in the results matrix, by selecting any cell in the matrix, it now shows me the results. After I've gone through and looked at all of my data, if I'm satisfied with the type of analysis I've done, I've maybe sent my data off to a report, I've documented what the issues were. In the future, I might want to have one of my test engineers or operators or somebody else in the organization be able to use this project. But when they do that, they're not going to need to have access to all of the analysis parameters like I might have. So the first thing I can do is define through my favorites concept what I want them to be able to modify. So maybe they can modify the frequency span and number of lines, and maybe a little bit of information about the start and stop speed of the run-up. So we can see I've now reduced the analysis parameters, and I can do the same thing here for the order extraction element. Maybe the only thing they need to do is modify what orders are actually extracted based on the type of test that we're doing. So now I've got a predefined process that I can have other people in the organization use. Just so I can validate what that looks like, if I come down and look at this operator mode template, what I can do now is ensure that we've got the hardware loaded. So I've gone through and defined all of the properties I want it to use. I've named all the signals. I've defined what type of high-pass filters and everything should be used. And here we are. We can see we've got an RPM profile. We've got some data coming in. Over here, we can see that I have a valid process chain. Once the RPM starts to drop, I can simply go through and say, at this point, I'm now ready to make my recording. What'll happen once the recording is done is I can, continue to modify or monitor any of these parameters. I can look at any of this data that I'm interested in. Once I've got the complete set of data, I now have all of my results processed, and I go through and maybe turn off some of these things that I don't need. And now I'll go through and look at any of the data. So now, as the specialist, the project that I started off with, where I used to solve some complicated problem, I've now turned that into a template that can be used by anybody else in the organization, and they have much fewer access to properties, but it's very easy for them to go through and generate a report. So that way, once we've got all of the analysis completed, they have the tools to simply make the report and then send it to me for me to evaluate the results, which is ultimately the goal for the specialist.